for example, we're taking a Type 964 911, which people will be familiar as the last swing axle 911. But as we're reimagining that, we're actually bringing it closer in shape to the original G-body 911, because that was an appearance that Porsche files really loved. But optimizing the proportions of that, and Rob is the master of this, right? His eye for optimizing what's unmistakably a 911, but finessing it and optimizing it so it's even more beautiful than the original. Certainly from the exterior, the cars are gorgeous. You open up the door and then look at the interior, and it's another aha moment. And so it's not just artists on the exterior that are working on the bodies, but it's artists on the seats and artists on the consoles and artists on the steering wheels. And I don't say anything goes, because we still do want to stay true to it being a 911, but some of the things that have been done on the interiors of the vehicles to make it a client's own is pretty special.
Well, I realized, though, that if you wanted a professional career, that driving sedans wasn't necessarily, or production cars wasn't necessarily the best path. You needed to be in formula cars. And so I ended up selling my house at the time. I was not married, and bought a Formula Atlantic. And that is when I started my professional racing. Ford was looking at doing their own ground-up sports car, and they went through several iterations under what they called the code name Petunia. And then the Petunia project turned into being the Ford GT /40 on it, that they debuted at the Detroit Auto Show in 2002. And Ford was looking at it as strictly as a show car, but the reception that they had was so great that they wanted to see what would be involved in taking that into production.
Well, I think California is a big adjustment. And the California vibe, and Singer definitely is at the center of California car culture, which I obviously was exposed to. And at Ford, we had our studio in California, but just
That's right.
being there and feeling it's a real thing. And there's a special and different way that Californians love their cars, and that is imbibed into Singer. The 911 is so iconic, and without a doubt, it's so German, right? I mean, Porsche
Right.
is that iconic German company, and their approach to the iterations of that vehicle are very Germanic, in their attention to detail. And applying California car culture to a 911 and seeing how that happened and is happening it's definitely adjustment, because, as you said, I really am a Midwest boy at heart. I may not look it, but, born and raised in St. Louis, and then, most of my career in the Michigan area, although I was lucky with Ford to be, working in Europe twice, and in Thailand and China. It was always coming back to Dearborn eventually. Ultimatic is a Canadian company, but obviously big presence in Canada and Toronto, but global, big presence in Detroit. Ford, GM, Stellantis are their biggest customers. So still a very Midwestern based approach to the business. And the California approach is a little bit different, and it's a little bit more artistic. It's a little bit more free flow. And I used to say I went from being, one of the rebels, and maybe, certainly one of the more rebellious executives at Ford, to being the most conservative guy at Multimatic. And I am definitely the most conservative guy at Singer, so, even on another scale. So, but it's a great team, and we really enjoy each other. And to me, I've just been very lucky, whether it was at Ford or Multimatic, to be surrounded by great people and just enjoying going to work and working with them.
What's your mission at Singer? What are you trying to do?
So, obviously we're so focused on reimaginations of 911s, and on a day-to-day basis, we just spend all day on how can we do that better, and how can we build it with higher quality, how can we really knocked their socks out with an emotional design reimagination of 911. But I do think that the company is also moving to the brand is really starting to stand for something. The Singer approach is starting to stand for something, and maybe even going beyond just the reimagination of 911. So we recently announced the partnership with Willow Springs and Harbor Capital, who's now bought the Willow Springs Raceway, and iconic track. Um, the oldest track out in the West, but certainly needed some investment. And so we obviously have a California reputation. The grassroots, the development of the cars that Rob and Maz have done have been because of miles and miles spent at Willow Springs. Um, but also our luxury brand reputation and be able to bring that to an opportunity at Willow Springs. So we have a vision of that being still incredibly accessible for grassroots racing and grassroots track days and the whole greater Los Angeles or West Coast California area being able to continue to use Willow Springs while at the same time creating a club and a true luxury experience that eventually residents there could enjoy and so that's almost Singer, right? This ultra luxury reimagination of an icon that still is incredibly accessible and understandable by any car aficionado. And I think our brand stands for that a little bit. And I think there's a lot of opportunities beyond just reimagination of Line 11 that could be in our future with that approach.
And I know that the desire is to, I've talked to Maz on this program. I've talked to Rob a few years ago, even. I know that the desire is to keep it very bespoke, very contained, very small, very exclusive. There's a fine line, right? Back to my earlier comment about how many units that you used to oversee. There is the desire in the auto industry repeatedly make more, and more, because the measurement of success is based on volume, scale, and more. But you've got to fight that while satisfying the public so that the wait time doesn't get too long, right?
Yeah.
And also by not diluting the brand. There's that balance has got to be in your head at all times.
Yeah. And I think even more so in our heads. I think, the rule always is, build one less than the demand.
The Ferrari
but I
example.
think our approach has to be even more restrictive on that and stay true to that. I don't, in some ways it's more a matter of how many of a specific vehicle are you going to build. And so I see our volumes. I think our new announcement on a 911 Carrera with a naturally aspirated engine. Back in the day, Porsche offered that iconic turbo bodywork, but with a naturally aspirated engine. That was the Carrera, and we're reimagining that now. That'll be 100 units. So our production capability, wanting to ramp that up a little bit, to that 200, 250 units a year eventually is probably going to be a good sweet spot for us. But probably more importantly within that, the models that we would build, maintaining that we're really talking about lifetime volumes in the hundreds, certainly not ever getting to 1,000 or anything like that. So that bespoke aspect, the ultra high luxury aspect, the exclusivity aspect, the pricing discipline aspect. It's important for us that we obviously sell the vehicles at a fair price, but they're not going to depreciate as soon as you accept delivery, right? They're going to maintain or even appreciate on volumes. And so you probably are not buying a Singer for an investment, but if you have to convince your significant other to buy a Singer, a 911 reimagined by Singer, you can certainly say that you're not going to lose money on that, on a reimagination by Singer.
You've said the word reimagine a number of times. It's more than just branding, isn't it, Raj? It's kind of a global worldview. What does it mean internally?
So it's obviously there's an aspect of renovation that's been in the industry for a long time, just bring the car back to original. There's been a more recent trend to restomodding of taking these classic vehicles, but putting new technology in them, whether it's a new crate engine or a new suspension. I think what Singer does is the next level of beyond that, which is why we call it reimagination, right? It's still a 911. We strip it down to its bare metal, but then we do to some extent reimagine that body with entirely new bodywork. Sometimes carbon fiber bodywork to reduce the weight. But for example, we're taking a Type 964 911, which people will be familiar as the last swing axle 911. But as we're reimagining that, we're actually bringing it closer in shape to the original G-body 911, because that was an appearance that Porsche files really loved. But optimizing the proportions of that, and Rob is the master of this, right? His eye for optimizing what's unmistakably a 911,
Mm.
but finessing it and optimizing it so it's even more beautiful than the original. Um, Underneath the car, we spent a lot of time improving the dynamics of the vehicle. And not for lap times, we're not out there to set a new lap record anywhere. But we are there to make a real emotional connection with the driver and a real pure, positive emotional response in driving this vehicle. That the best test is, does it bring a smile to your face, right?
Mm.
That you will never measure on a stopwatch. And so that's why it's certainly much more than just renovating the car. It's actually much more than resto-modding a car. That's why we use that term reimagination of what a 911 can be. And it's an homage to that iconic car, the 911, and that iconic company, Porsche. But with our approach and our really low volumes and frankly a price point that's significantly higher, it's what could be with that vehicle.
And I imagine that storytelling is just as important as metal and mechanics, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Both the story and I would say the journey that we go through with our customers as well. Um, Obviously our customers are 911 fans, right? So
Yeah.
they know the vehicles. A lot of them, the one that resonates with them is when they were a certain age, when they were the teenager, and what poster did they have up on their wall. And so that storytelling of where we want to go together, reimagining their particular vehicle, when we take their donor vehicle and start the path of what should we do, and how can we make this your vehicle and your commission. And many of our owners our clients who we provide services to tell you that, the day that 2 to 3 year wait in finally getting their vehicle is a fantastic day, but it's also a little bit bittersweet because it's the end of the journey that they really enjoyed with us so much,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
why so many of them come back and say, let's do another journey. Let's do another. I love my classic. Now let's do that with the turbo. I love my turbo. Now let's do that with the DLST. Or let's do that with our newest offering, a 911 Carrera coupe. So it really is the story that we're telling together and the journey that we go on together with our clients.
And can you take us through that client journey? What does it look like when I raise my hand and say, "Okay, I'd like to be part of that journey"? And what are the nuances and changes and subtleties that exist along that path?
Yeah, so one of the subtleties is we actually don't sell cars, we sell services, right?
Right.
And so some of our customers have a 911, a Type 964 or 911. That's what we work on. And so we'll take that as what we call the donor car. Some of them don't have that, so we obviously have a good expertise in finding a good donor car for them, and so we'll work them to get that donor car. Unfortunately, the next period is a wait.
Yeah.
So, because we have that very big order bank and we want to keep our volumes at that right level. We want to have the right people and the right technicians and the right artists to be working on the car. and don't want to fall into the trap of growing bigger and the car being sacrificed because of that, the quality or the workmanship around it. So yeah, there is a weight, and we are trying to reduce that, but it does come with the territory a little bit. Then at a point in time, we'll start discussing the spec of the vehicle. And one of the things about a 911 by Singer is there's literally no two alike.
Right. Right.
There is a limit to what we can customize, but there's not much of one. Certainly not in colors, not in trim. Certain options that we can do. But those aspects become very personal. That's why we call them commissions. And particularly and you'll know this, Jason, certainly from the exterior, the cars are gorgeous. You open up the door and then look at the interior, and it's another aha moment.
Hmm.
And so it's not just artists on the exterior that are working on the bodies, but it's artists on the seats and artists on the consoles and artists on the steering wheels. And I don't say anything goes because we still do want to stay true to it being a 911. But some of the things that have been done on the interiors of the vehicles to make it a client's own is pretty special. We can phase that spec process. We can obviously, we start obviously with the paint color first while we could still be working on the interior with the client refining that. But at a point in time, we'll freeze that down as well. While this is all happening, we're disassembling that donor car, stripping it down to bare metal, bringing it into our fabrication shop, stitch welding the entire vehicle to improve the weld integrity, in many cases adding reinforcements and improve the torsional capability of the body in white. Then it moves into our body fabrication shop where, as I said, the panels, many of them carbon fiber, are custom fitted to each individual body, and to a level of detail on flushness and margins that are a level beyond anything you'll see anywhere else, in my opinion. Into our paint shop, with custom paints, custom tri-coats. The number of coats is significantly higher than what you'll see in any other vehicle. We've been known to have some vehicles with up to 8 coats or more of paint to achieve the effects that we want.
Wow.
We then, because of that level, we'll actually let that car cure for a longer period of time than most. That adds to this wait time. And so, we're talking about weeks of curing, whereas other places, may wait a day or a week. And then coming into our general assembly where the real magic is happening on installation of all those improvements to the powertrain, improvements to the gearbox, as well as all of these custom interiors. And then a pretty significant quality check process, full drive of the vehicles, full shakedown of the vehicles, and then eventual delivery to the customer. Depending on what vehicle we're talking about, yeah, that can just even from beyond the point of committing a vehicle to you, a commission to you, your process where you're actually engaging with us on what the vehicle wants to be can easily be a 2-year process. And so you can imagine the excitement that builds up during that time frame until the final delivery of the dream that you had imagined, and our privilege in being able to provide that to you.
It's a little different than one vehicle a minute.
It is. It is. It is, but I want to. I don't want to discount the passion that those guys
Yeah.
at the Blue Oval have for that as well.
Both sides.
Right?
Both
Yeah,
sides.
and they have a passion to make that available to everyone.
Right.
And so the amount of heart that goes into an F-150, don't discount. There's a lot of heart that goes into a 911 reimagined by Singer, but there's a lot of heart that goes into an F-150 as well. There's a lot of heart that goes into a Ford GT and a Mustang GTD and all of that. So between
This is
Ford and Multimatic and Singer, I would say that's one thing that I've been privileged to be around people that had a passion for the business. So.
But you're in the sweet spot of exactly where you need to be, Raj. I mean, what you just described to me in the customer journey is an engineer's dream.
It is, and like I said, you know, those few moments that I get to take a step back, I am incredibly lucky that I was trained by the best at Ford on what high volume and processes look like. I was trained by Peter Chapka at Multimatic, the founder of Multimatic, of how you run a company that size and how to stay nimble and hungry and decentralize and have the lowest possible level making decisions, have them feel accountable for the business. I was lucky to be with Multimatic while we learned this process of how to build at one a day, which is different than one a minute, but it's also different than one a year. And just feel lucky to be able to bring that to Singer, with my experience, but also be able to work with people like Maz and Rob. And I am definitely one of those guys. Some guys will say, I obviously had the talent and the brains and all of that. I didn't have any of that. I was just really lucky to be working with a lot of great people and mentors, and that taught me a lot. And I'm now lucky enough to be able to share that knowledge with some great people.
You and I haven't seen each other in a while, and since you are no longer working for a large OEM, I have to ask you a couple of industry questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
What is going on in the EV world right now? I, there's been such an enormous push, and this is not a political question, but it is a product question because you're a product guy.
Yeah.
Do consumers just not appreciate EVs yet? Is the chicken and the egg with infrastructure? What's your view on it? And if you were sitting in your former role, would you be scratching your head going, well, I guess we'll switch out to hybrids now?
Well, I mean, as you know, Jason, I'm a big hybrid fan.
Yeah.
And hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and EVs. I don't know if my hindsight's 2020 on this, but from an engineering point of view, the first thing I will say, and this isn't from Singer or from Ford or Multimatic, this is just Raj.
Right.
I personally do believe that climate change is a very real threat, and there's a lot of good scientists at Ford that did a lot of good work and came to the same conclusion. A lot of good scientists everywhere come to that conclusion. So the need to reduce greenhouse gases is real. The automotive industry's responsibility within that is real. But it's a very complex equation on how to get there. And consumer taste is one aspect, engineering capability is another aspect, and the economics is certainly an aspect. I always felt like the consumer acceptance of an EV, that challenge was never about how the vehicles drove. Anyone who's been in an EV,
Yeah.
I've yet to hear someone first time they got an EV that said that was worse than I expected, right? Most of them are surprised how well they drive, how fun they are to drive, how quiet they are. So the acceptance of an EV by the consumer, or just on the attributes of what a vehicle needs to do, I think was always overstated. The range aspect is real. And particularly for those who are not just doing a daily commute, the range is fine for the daily commutes. And if you have somewhere to charge, it's no more inconvenient than charging your phone, right? If you don't, if you're parking on the sidewalk or the street, then it's a different challenge. But those aspects of range anxiety on long trips and the recharge time is real. And so that's the aspect of what engineers need to figure out and how to improve. But the economic aspect is also real in that still, the batteries are still much cheap or becoming much cheaper than they were, but the economics for the consumer of what you save on fuel, on gas per week versus the incremental cost of the EV, still doesn't make sense. Now, do I think consumers are doing that math? Probably not. But do I think in a secondary way they get it and they've been able to figure out this doesn't quite make economic sense for me? Yeah, in the end, the economics never goes away.
Well, probably the speed part of it, I can say, was almost preschool. Is that we had where I grew up in Southern California, we lived across from a park, and there was a very steep hill. And on my tricycle, which was to my parents' grief on it, I was a terror going down that at speeds that they couldn't understand how I could actually go that fast and stay on top of the tricycle. So I guess I've always liked the speed part of it from a
tricycle
personal standpoint. Yeah, on a tricycle. So I'm going back to preschool on this deal. But when I got into at the beginning, end of junior high school and into high school is when cars became, and living in Southern California was a big deal with a car culture, and it became a big deal. And then my dad ended up, from a friend, purchased a 1956 Porsche 356 European model. And I got to drive that when I got my driver's license. And then I received it after I graduated. Very fortunate. I received it after graduating from high school. And then I started fixing it up. And then I joined the Porsche Owners Club, which is different than the Porsche Club of America. And the Porsche Owners Club was a bunch of professional and amateur Porsche racers. And going to those meetings on this deal was when you realize, wow, being a race car driver probably would be pretty cool. So I would say that that's kind of where, in my late teens, is when I really got the urge to follow racing.
Who was it that influenced you the most? Was it Carroll Shelby?
No, at the time, because it was more on the Porsche side of life, I would say that there was in Southern California, a gentleman by the name of Alan, and I can't remember his right name here in a second, which I will in a second. And Milt Minter and Vic Elford are professional Alan Johnson. And and Alan wrote the book, one of the first books on how to race a car in the B. And so I would say that they were very influential with me on doing it. And then I sold the Porsche because I wanted to get a newer one, a 911S. And then I realized it was going to take a long time to save up for that. So I didn't want to wait that long. So I saw an ad to buy a used Shelby Mustang in Southern California. So I ended up buying that and fixing that up. And that's what introduced me to the world, if you will, Ford Performance. And so that had a big, and watching the Shelby Mustangs, the Cobras, and of course the Ford GT40s on this deal, I fell in love with all of that type of sports car racing.
The Saleen Mustang debuted in 1983, right?
Yeah, we started the company in 83. It was actually a 1984 model that we debuted in June of 1984 at Sears Point Racetrack.
And what gave you the confidence to launch a company around modifying Mustangs?
Well, a little bit on my background is that after I had the Mustang, I fixed that up to go racing, and I entered 1973. I entered my first race at Riverside, California, and the worst possible thing happened is I won. And I realized, wow, this is, how hard can this be? But I also, and then I'll just say it's been downhill ever since. So I'll get that out. But I realized though that if you wanted a professional career, that driving sedans wasn't necessarily, or production cars wasn't necessarily the best path. You needed to be in formula cars. And so I ended up selling my house at the time. I was not married, and bought a Formula Atlantic. And that is when I started my professional racing. And I still didn't have a lot of money, but we raced against the era of drivers. I competed wheel to wheel on that. On the Formula One side was Gilles Villeneuve
Of course.
and KK Rosberg, who won the Formula One championship, and his son won it a few years back. And then on the IndyCar side, it was Bobby Rahal and Danny Sullivan on this. And then I also, with one of the car programs I had, I was also teammate with Rick Mears. So that's the era I grew up. And then from Atlantic, you either went into Formula One or into IndyCar. Neither one opened for me, but I was offered a paying drive with Pontiac Motor Company. And I debated if I would lower my standards to go back and drive a sedan or a production car. I ended up doing that. And then that's what introduced me to Detroit. And in 1982, I was with the team, the Pontiac team that won the championship for Pontiac, and Ford Motor Company was just coming back into racing. And I got to know the guys at Ford, and they were going to build a special edition Mustang, and that was going to be a 4-cylinder single turbo, the SVO. And I said, ooh, I think the American public would rather have a V8 version of it. And they said, well, we're committed on the 4-cylinder, but Steve, if you had interest, we might support you doing a V8 version. So I left my position at the end of the racing season in 1983 and started the company to build special edition V8 version Mustangs that would strictly support our racing endeavors. It wasn't to build street cars, but somewhere along the line, the street car and building your own cars got way involved. So we still pursued racing, but we also then got heavily involved in building ground-ups in street cars.
Well, you expanded into SUVs, even the Focus. Yep. Were you chasing opportunities in the market, or were you simply following your own curiosity?
It was a combination of both. I would say that there was certainly the Mustang as an American muscle car, sports car. On this was the right platform. Has turned out to be a very good platform for us to do this. But then the other opportunities and the other market segments, we got into truck racing in the late 80s, early 90s on this, and I've won the most races as a race truck driver on doing it. So we then started doing trucks during that period of time as well, and I looked at different opportunities that I felt that it could take our expertise on the track and apply that, if you will, on vehicles that can be driven every day for the street. So that's kind of what has been a little bit of the genesis that has driven us.
Well, and many may not realize that you built the mid-2000s Ford GT, right? And the late 2000s Dodge Viper. How did those opportunities come about? I mean, here you were building now on someone else's badge versus your own. Those were great opportunities. When we came out with the S7, I kept Ford, top management of Ford Motor Company, informed of what we were doing and what we were about to debut and what our intentions with the vehicle were. And so we came out with it, and then that ended up being very successful. In addition to that, then a couple years later, Ford was looking at doing their own ground-up sports car, and they went through several iterations under what they called the code name Petunia. And then the Petunia project turned into being the Ford GT /40 on it that they debuted at the Detroit Auto Show in 2002. And Ford was looking at it as strictly as a show car, but the reception that they had was so great that they wanted to see what would be involved in taking that into production. And that's where we were then, because of my relationship with Ford,
on this, we were then asked to get involved with helping to deal with the engineering aspect of it and also the limited build. And we ended up with two separate contracts with Ford. One was overseeing the engineering and the certification with it. I moved a fellow by the name of Neil Hanneman, who was one of our main guys on the S7, relocated him back to Detroit to work with SVT and John Coletti and Ford to engineer the vehicle. And then the other contract I had was the complete build and assembly and paint of the vehicle. And I had to set up a facility back in Detroit, Troy, Michigan, to be specifically. And we manufactured as private label all of the vehicles and shipped them directly to the Ford dealer with the Ford badging and the window stickers for the Ford dealers. And then after that, the next project we ended up doing is because I had a first-class automotive assembly in the Detroit area, is we got involved with Dodge and the Viper to do all of the sub-assemblies and the paint for them on the Viper program. And then we also did the supercharged version of Ford for the F-150 Harley-Davidson edition well. And so that's what really kind of got me more in the OEM, what is the large OEM build.
What did you learn from producing Halo cars for major OEMs?
It's again, when you're dealing with very large companies, you need to be very nimble and focus on your role and the aspects that you on doing that. But it also offered a whole litany to elevate, if you will, our production, our just-in-time, our quality controls, the manufacturing skill sets that are used to do those type of vehicles. And so I would say that, you know, that those experiences are always ongoing and are always very educational, as well as great building blocks for what we do with our own vehicles.
Is there more pressure, Steve, when you're involved with something like that than when it's your own?
Well, I think I would say it's I'll use this as an analogy. Whether it doesn't have to be cars. If someone has entrusted you for some aspect of doing something for them, I would say there's always pressure that you have to do a better job that you've been entrusted to it than if it was your own, that you have to do it on yourself, because you can modify your own expectations or timetable or whatever. But when someone else asks you to do a job, it is a lot more scrutinized, and you have a lot more responsibilities to deliver.
Yeah, well said. So many other manufacturers, I mean, we mentioned the Viper, but there have been others who have benefited from the Saleen treatment. You did Challengers before there were Hellcats. You did Camaros. You even did Tesla. So do you approach each brand differently, or is there a Saleen DNA that applies across all of those cars?
Well, I think, first of all, I guess there's a basic DNA. This is because I'm heavily involved in the development of all of those, both as from a racing background into the product development cycle on this. Is the one thing that has served me well is to be able to translate what I learned on vehicle dynamics and everything from powertrains, suspension, aerodynamics, ergonomics on this. I'm able to translate that from both a high performance driving racing into street driving, and that has always served me very well in the evaluation of a whole vehicle. The other thing, though, that I would say is that we've also, since we've been doing it for 43, 44 years now, we have also been able to really learn what should or could not get done, both from a commercial standpoint, from a cost-effective standpoint, from a physical standpoint, has served us well in the development of the vehicles. And we're able to, I think, apply that much more effectively and much more cost effectively. And that's where our current lineup of our Mustangs and the truck benefit that. Not that they're inexpensive cars, because they're not, they're premium cars, but the cost effectiveness and our tier offering them through established dealer network on this deal has given us, if you will, a pretty good advantage from a competition standpoint to be offering a product that the consumer can purchase complete to have a higher level of performance, safety, features, exclusivity, which helps the collectability of it, at a price point that is more within reach with a lot of people, even though it's a premium brand.
Well, just on the DNA subject, I mean, you have shared that DNA across so many interesting projects. But I would venture to say that, let's take the Challenger, and as I said, it came before the Hellcat era. I think that Saleen helped prove maybe the appetite for high performance muscle cars was still very much alive.
Well, I won't disagree with you on this, Dale. I had a little bit of a disappointment, I will just say, on this, is that I had at our facility in California, when we were developing a supercharger for it, I had a lot of the senior engineers from Chrysler and Dodge out looking at how we were adapting all of that to our Challenger, why we were using a twin screw supercharger as opposed to a centrifugal or to a root style, is how we were using the male and the female rotors in there and how that was working and why that was a better application for it. And then I really kind of took them behind the curtain and showed that, because I thought at the time that we would be a subset to where we would do that. They chose to go down in a different direction, but they have, I won't say copied, but they've initiated and imitated a lot of the stuff, especially down to the twin screw supercharger, of what a big, and their car is, the Dodge was a much heavier car, it's a much larger car. So the amount of torque and the way that that has to drive has to be applied differently than, let's say, how we would tackle the Mustang or a Camaro. And so all of these get into the very specific aspects of being able to do it. So the core DNA, so to speak, is taking and looking at the base vehicle, if I'm taking a base vehicle, and looking at its strengths and weaknesses and how we can minimize the weaknesses and accentuate the strengths from both a performance, a safety, ergonomic, and a full driving experience, is what I think has served us well in doing that. And I will just say that at what kind of going back in time with the Fox body Mustangs, is at the time, even though it wasn't by today's standards much horsepower, the power to weight ratio, because a Fox body Mustang was fairly lightweight, which meant that there was a lot of flex in the chassis. So we spent more time with the aerodynamic in the chassis than I did worrying about the horsepower aspect on initially as we developed that. We then went on to as the next generation of Mustang, they increased the chassis rigidity, which added more weight. And that's where then I realized, well, we need to add and accentuate more torque and horsepower to augment to give it a better all-around feel. So those are the type of approaches that we end up doing and looking at the base vehicle. The Tesla is the same way, is that range anxiety was at the time in 2014 the big thing. So I didn't really look at putting more if you will, juice to accelerate. I did change the acceleration rate by changing the gear ratios, but I didn't want to take the batteries. But one of the problems with the electric cars is your first lap is always your fastest, and after that you have a tremendous deterioration on the battery. So what we concentrated on was improving the cooling for the batteries so that I would stay at peak power longer, so I could have better acceleration and better performance for a longer period of time. These are the approaches that we've always taken when we've been dealing with existing platforms.